Where we are starting today is 1941, November. The Germans had tried for 2 years to convince us that we also were Aryans in the Netherlands. But they completely forgot that there were Fries, Franken, and other tribes that were there, but not Aryans. So they got disgusted. It was time at that time. We were worried sick that Germany was overcoming everything and that we would be forever under Germany. They didn't talk about the 1,000-year Reich all the time. But Japan bombed Hawaii, the harbor, and that forced the USA to take that as starting a new war against the Americas. And America wasn't ready because the Senate had decided they didn't want to fight a war in Germany again, in Europe again. And so we were delighted when we heard it because we were afraid that we were never going to get rid of these Germans. It might take another year or 3, 4, 5, who knows. And we were more assured that things would be better eventually when Hitler declared war against America. It was in this country very upsetting, particularly to the Senate, because they had refused to even think about fighting. And they had to start immediately getting men to be in the Army, in the Air Force, in the naval system. And well, my father's comment was, Hitler has just lost the war, by declaring that. In this country, there was a serious problem because they didn't have enough men to work in all the building of ships, U-boats, all the material you needed to fight a war. It really was a very bad situation here, except when the women stood up and said, if you have to go to war and we don't have enough manpower, we will run and work in the factories, in the harbors, everywhere it's necessary. We will do the work. The older males trained everybody, and that really was wonderful. When I heard about that, I thought, oh, wow, isn't that a wonderful country where the women help out when it's necessary? I was really excited about that. Where we were, the Germans were very mad at us that we would not join them to be Aryans or help them in their war against, they had just declared against Russia. So they also were fighting in Russia at that time. And the first story I want to tell you is a wife of somebody who signed up to fight with the Germans in Russia. He left, and she was home by herself. And for her betraying a Dutchman who was really against the Germans to the SS, and she was picked, sent off to somewhere, we don't know where, but we never saw him again. It was really bad. So they came in the morning of one day and they gave the woman Piglet. Well, food was still very scarce and it was a great gift, but it was a live piglet and they went off. They also gave her several bottles of schnapps. That is a very potent alcoholic drink. And she was known to love alcohol too. She had a friend staying with her because she was by herself. And they decided, how do we manage a piglet? Well, first of all, you take an axe, and the backside of the axe, you hit it in the neck, and it'll kill it. It worked. But what do we do next? We have to scrape all this hair off, and I don't know how we do that. It's a big job, and it's so stiff you can't ever get it off. Well, there should be a better way. So they decided if she used her big cook pot that she put her laundry in, since we didn't have soap, we had to boil the laundry. It might just fit in there, and they'd put it in there for a couple of hours. And they went ahead and set it up. They had some coal still that would last a day at least. And they started. They came in, the pig was in, the little till stuck out at the top, and they went inside. Would you like some schnapps? Oh boy, that sounds good. And they had schnapps and talked, and schnapps and talked all day long. They couldn't hardly stand up. And suddenly the one said, oh my gosh, what happened to the piglet? It's 5 o'clock and it's been cooking all that time. And they went to look, and the guest pulled on the tail, and the tail came off. And it sounds like a stupid story, but they said, well, how do we get it out? It's all hot water, and we don't have pitchers that fit so we can pull it out and get rid of it. Well, they started with small amounts, and they couldn't get it done. So they went to the neighbors to ask how to go about it. And they told them what happened. And the neighbors were not Nazis. They stood there and just laughed at them. They said, well, what you have to do, you have to get it out, and you have to dig a big hole in the backyard, and then you put the whole piglet in there and put the dirt over it. Maybe that's the way to handle that. Well, they wanted to get the water out, so they got smaller containers and managed to take it out. It stank because it had the gut still in it, of course. And every other part of that was cooked whole in that piglet. So actually, they didn't get anything, and the whole village just got a big, big laugh out of that. Serves them right. That was that. The Germans were getting even because we wouldn't join them in the war. So they turned off the electricity. And I'm talking mostly about my mother because she was having to take care of my father, who had been in prison for a year. And she had to give him milk every half hour a tablespoonful of milk without fat, and then with water, half and half. So she would make a big bottle of that, and then she'd have enough for a day, and she could take it out of it. She'd give him 1 tablespoonful every half hour. In the first 2 at the first week after he came home, he gained 14 pounds. The next 2 weeks, he gained 7 pounds each. That's 28 pounds in 3 weeks that he gained. You can imagine what shape he was in. And he was constantly bleeding from his stomach from his treatment in the prison. My mother did everything to try to keep him alive, and she managed. But come this electric stuff, he had bought her an electric stove. So what do you do with an electric stove when you don't have electricity? She said, I'll go and see if I can trade it. So she came back and she said, oh, I traded it for a gas stove, propane. She had 2 cylinders of it with the stove. And it was a little while later that he ran out of propane, and there was nothing. She couldn't find propane in the whole village or anywhere else. So she said, okay, I will trade my stove for a wood stove if I can find one. So she managed that too, but there was not any wood available. But there was a place where the Germans had needed wood, and they had mowed an area where there was about 50 trees standing at about my waistline. And I said, well, I will go and see what I can do. So I went in the shed and got every tool that I could find to take with me, because I'd never done something like that. My brother, who was older, was hiding out from the Germans. They were looking for him, and he couldn't be home. So I got there with my tools and my bicycle and a rope. And first I tried to saw it at the bottom, at the ground, to get as much wood as possible. That didn't work. And I thought and thought, how do I do next? If I try the eggs, I'm going to lose a bunch of wood, and I need as much wood as I can get. So I had a shovel, a small one, and I could dig between the roots and get the roots loose and cut those with the axe. And it took me almost all afternoon. But I came home with a piece of tree. I got there and I measured all the lines, I put all the lines on how thick the slabs would be so they fit in our stove. And then I'd have to take the axe and cut it smaller for the width. So I measured all the on the lines and got it sawed up. And then I took, we had a large block of oak wood that we used for cutting on. Well, I was going to start with the axe and the first round piece. And when I was in the kitchen, I am used to holding something down with my thumb, so I did that too. And I hit it with the axe, and I cut part of my thumb off and ran inside. Mama, I lost the tip of my thumb. She said, oh, I've got something for that. She cleaned it up real good and said, I have some salve that'll be good for keeping it in place. She put it on, put top tip on, and put a tight bandage on. So she said, we have to go to the doctor to make sure that nothing else has to be done. So we went. The pressure stopped the bleeding, which was good. The doctor said, I have a much better salve, so I'm going to take it off and put a new salve on, and it's more likely to stay put. He did, and he said, keep it on for 3 weeks, and then we'll see if it's taken. And in 3 weeks, it was totally healed, but I still have a scar there to remind me. So now I knew how to do it. I went back to the block and I took the axe with 2 hands and hit it hard. And sure enough, it broke in pieces. And I had enough so Mom could cook that night. And every day I got better and better at it. I would get some wood for her. When we had a razzia, and a razzia is what we mean by the Germans coming in, or the SS was the better name, to get people for their slave labor camps in Germany. And they surrounded the village, and then they go in and pick up every male they could find that was over 16 and up to 45 in case they were very short, they'd go to 55, but they'd march them off to Germany to a camp. Now the village where I lived was a smuggling village. It was farm hands, it was factory hands that went to the village, to the city to work in the factories. And they needed extra money. So they were smugglers. They knew every path, every hiding place going into Germany to get cheap stuff because they had inflation that was so horrible. Everything cost nothing. So they didn't like it in the slave labor camps. After about a day or 2, they started leaving. When it was getting dark, they went on their pathway and on their way back home. They said it to their wives. We didn't like it, so we came home. And in a few days, all the people that had picked up in our little village, they were all back. Anyway, there was another thing. My mother also had purchased and saved grain because it makes very good breakfasts. But the problem now was she didn't have electricity. She couldn't plug it just in. She told me, please go to the nearest farmer and here's a big box, fill it with hay. Will you please? And I said, yeah. She said, pack it in, so there's lots in there. And I wasn't sure what she was up to. So I came home with a box full, really pushed down. And she said, what we're going to do is make a hole in the middle with a hay layer in the bottom, and we take the pot that would have to boil too long. It takes up all the wood, and I want to cut that off. And I still wanted to cook for a long time. So what we are doing is we take the pot and put it in the middle and put a lot of hay over it, and then close the lid, and you put something heavy on top, shove it under the table, and let it sit for the morning. And when the morning came up, there was hot cereal that you could eat. and she had to thin it a little bit with the water because all the milk that we got was going to my father to have him survive. Anyway, everything that they did hurt the women about how to run a household. It was amazing. My mother still had a Singer sewing machine. She was a whiz with all kinds of stuff. You know, she could do anything. But it had a treadle still for the power that you needed to sew. So she'd sit there with her feet going and sewing away. And she had made all our clothes for a long time. She designed them, she made them, and they always were pretty. I had a sister that was 5 years younger. My brother was 2 years older, and she had beautiful dresses that she made. If she saw a beautiful piece of cloth, she'd pick it up and make something out of it. But you couldn't get any of that stuff anymore. All the shops were empty. There was no soap, no hand soap, no soap for washing your clothes or your dishes. And you had to use hot water to try to get it off and get it clean. We had rugs that you could pick up. They got filthy inside, and every couple of months she had to pick it up because you couldn't get the dirt out of it. She'd hang it in the outside, and she'd hit it with a clop, you know, to get all the dirt out. And then she had to do the dust and dirt that was on the ground. She did it by hand because that's all the way she had of doing it. And I tried to help her as much as I could. But I also had to go to school. The Germans took half of the schools for their staying. And so we had to go to school half days, 1 week in the morning and the next week in the afternoon for about 5 hours each. And I'll come back to other things that my mother had to do, but this is, we had to get to school on bicycles. Of course, in the Netherlands, you'd ride bicycles. I rode with 5 or 6 boys that were along in the same school in Enschede. 45 minutes to get there. Hard riding. Those boys were older than I was, and I had to keep up with them. So I pedaled along as hard as I could and built some muscles that way. Then in the afternoon, I had to help my mother, and there were all kinds of other things to do. And I had homework. But now back to my mother. Then my little sister grew out of her clothes. She would take those clothes and give them away. But she used my clothes to make her a new dress and take her dress to make a dress for me when I outgrew my clothes. And she had to take each seam out separately so they would be cut. And she'd make clothes for the person who was less fat or less grown than the person that she had just gotten the clothes from. Also, we had trouble with sweaters. Again, you outgrew them, and we needed sweaters. That year, the winter time was minus 20 degrees centigrade at night. And without heating, you couldn't do much, you know. We had beautiful sweaters she had made us. And again, when my sister was outgrown a sweater, she'd take a sweater from me, but what they did was they took a board and unraveled the sweater so that she had a yarn, wound it really tight around that board, and wet it with cold water. And if it was very cold and it was then dry again, you had perfect yarn again. So you could make another sweater out of it. And if you did it with both of them, there was a little bit of extra, so that with the bigger sweaters, when she did it for me, she used my sister's sweater to put a little extra on it, so I would fit in mine. But she also raveled that often, and her own sweater she would make for me over and over again, you know. And she made everything really wide and long so it would last longer, so she wouldn't have to do it too fast. The other problem we had was shoes. Can you imagine not being able to find shoes for 5 years? I still have curly toes from having small shoes. That's why I have these wide shoes, because it's comfortable. The soles wore out. You know, it's a wet climate, so everything got cold and everything got wet, and it wore out fast. And then you put cardboard in your shoes, and that lasted very short. And I want you to remember what you would do in all those circumstances, what kind of problems you would have if you had to take care of all this stuff. So when the cardboard ran out, we put paper in there. We tried to exchange with other people that had outgrown their shoes and had smaller feet. And so somebody else might be fitting in it. But the only thing we had was that the women told the men that were around, cut us a sole out of wood. And they did. You know, you see these high soles. And we had lots of gray bags of rough material that the potatoes came in. And you take two straps and fold them over, that went over the front of the foot. And then before you put it on the wood, they embroidered so it wouldn't be so dull. And then they made a strap out of the rest. And you could make a pair of shoes out of that. And that went around the ankle and attached to the first strap. And you had a summer pair of straps, but that didn't last forever either. And in the wintertime, they didn't work, of course, because your feet would freeze out. Actually, there was one situation where my brother came home from school. He went to a different school that I did, and it was sleeting, and it was coming this way. And it was windy, and it was very cold. It was in the -20 area. And he came home, and he rode into our garden and kept riding around in a circle until my mother said, we have to go and see what's wrong with Willem. And we went to look, and he had been frozen to his bicycle. He couldn't get off. And so we had to bring him in, and we had a stove on at the time. Because it was so cold, we'd freeze to death. And so we put him in front of this in the stove and said, "You'll melt." And by the time it's melted, we'll have some dinner for you. That was really, really wild. For food, we didn't have much either. They had decided they were not given to tickets for going to the store because the stores had been owned mostly by the Jews, and the Jews has all been shipped to the camps where they were murdered. And so there was nothing to buy for food, essentially. So they decided to have a kitchen, a village kitchen, great big pots. And it was mostly water and cabbage leaves and onions and carrots and maybe some potatoes, but when we got potatoes, it was the peelings from the potatoes that they ate in the places where the Germans were staying. They didn't like peelings, but we got them in a pot, a village pot. And every night we had to go and we had a card, and then you had to say, we have 6 to punch, because there's 6 members in our family. My aunt lived with us, my sister, my brother, we counted, even though he was living on a farm for safety, and my father and mother, and my sister and myself. First, it even had some meat in it. It was amazing, because they stole all the cows and the sheep and everything else too to send to Russia. But it got worse and worse. And one of my duties also was go begging for food at the farms. And that got so bad the last 9 months that people came from long distances walking with baby carriages to try to get some food, and they dropped dead from hunger before they got back home again. But I'm going to tell you about that the next lecture. Anyway, one of the things that we did get was bread, but it wasn't really bread. They had flower bulbs, and they have some poison in them, but not that much. And so they ground that up, and it got the wet feeling of grain that was wet. And they made bread with that, and it hit your stomach like a ton of bricks. A small 5-pound loaf of bread would be like this, and it was heavy, and it sat there forever because you couldn't digest it. It only helped when you were hungry, and it cut the hunger pains that you had otherwise. But my aunt she was always eating too much anyway, and it was good for her not to get that much. But she ate too much of it, and one night she was terribly sick from it, and it hurt, and she was screaming. And we were not allowed out after 7 o'clock, and there were patrols that saw to it that we didn't. But she sounded so desperate. I said to Mom, I'll go see if I can find something from the doctor. We didn't have phones, we didn't have electricity, see? So my brother had given me a lecture. He had bought a pair of hobnailed boots at the bottom. And they weren't very high, but boy, were they hard on the knees. And he said, anytime you have to go on curfew outside, wear them. You never know when you might need them. Well, I started on the way to the doctor, and I was halfway there. I had borrowed a cape also that fell over my face to some extent, and halfway down my legs, so you couldn't see I was a girl. And here comes a patrol. And they said, who are you? Where are you supposed to going? I said, to the doctor. We have a very sick person in our house, and we need to get some medication from the doctor. And we can't wait till tomorrow morning. And they pulled my hood up, and they said, oh, ein Mädchen. It means a girl. And one of them grabbed my wrists and pulled them at my back and tried to dislocate my shoulders. My nose was on my knees, and they kind of dragged me over to a green place. They took my panties off. I knew what they were going to do, but I was only 12, 13 almost, and but they didn't know what I had on my feet. So they took my panties off, and one of them spread my knees and held that way and pulled his pants down and was crawling on his knees to get to the right place. And at one point, he couldn't control one leg, let it go for a minute, and I kicked him right in his genitals. And he started rolling around on the ground, saying, oh, oh, and on and on and on. And I jumped up, grabbed my underwear, and because it was the only pair I had left at that point, everything outgrown, and that was one my mother gave me, and I took off. What they didn't know was there was a path along that green, and that went to another road, and it was black. It was so dark, they couldn't see it. But I knew where it was. I took that, got to the next street, and across the street from there was the house of a friend of my father's. I knocked on the door. Who's there? Who's there? They were afraid that it was an invasion from the SS or somebody that wanted to get them. And I said, it's Neil Snell, you know me. Your friend is our friend. He said, oh, opened the door and said, come in, and looked at me and said, you need some help, and gave me ice for my shoulders. I still have injections for the shoulders so that I won't dislocate them. And he took care of me. I mean, the whole family worked at it. I got pillows under my knees. I got a pillow under my head. I got a wool blanket, and I got pain pills. And they said, tomorrow morning you are going to eat here. It's not a big breakfast, but we have enough for you too. And I am going to walk you home because I do not trust the Germans. And so they did. And my parents were worried sick about me. You know, you never know what would happen at night. And I later thanked my brother for taking such good care of me to tell me all this stuff. So that was really unusual. So also, we had the problems with fleas and lice. If you don't have soap, you can't clean up. You know, hot water feels good, but it doesn't do the cleaning. And you can't get your your bedding clean, because the, what was it? I've lost it. The fleas would bite and bite you all night, and they'd hide in the mattress, and they'd hide in the bedding. And my mother would boil the sheets overnight to kill them all that were there. But then the next night you had them again because they were in the mattress and they climbed out. And besides that, the sheets got worn out so long because they were already old when the war started. So my mother would slit them in the middle and fold them double so that the sides were together, and sew them together, and then put the hem in the outside. And we could go another maybe couple of years that they worked. But everything was difficult, made very difficult. And I have admired all the people that have lived through that and still could laugh about something. And I'll tell you a story that is very funny. The doctor had a mother that lived next door to us. We lived in a duplex. And she spent a lot of time at her doctor's house because she had two small grandchildren. She was in her late 80s, and she played with them all morning, and she was worn out. In the afternoon, she'd go take a nap, and they had a room for her just where she could take a nap. Nobody would disturb her. So one time she went there, and this is about the spirit of the women. She was so tired, she had some lunch, and she slept until 4 o'clock, and it was going to get dark at 4 o'clock. So she put a dress on, was going downstairs, and she would walk to our own house next door to us. And the door was locked. My children would not lock me up. What's going on? I bet the Germans took over because this is the nicest house in the village. And then she started hearing German spoken in the other part of the house. The Germans were having a party there, and they had locked her up. Now, what do I do? She started thinking, well, that bed is not so heavy, I can get it to the window. And she pushed and pushed, and she managed to get there. And she said, but I need some sheets. So she went to look in the drawers, and she found some double-sized sheets. And she tied them all together, and there were some smaller sheets that she could easier put on the bed. And she had the whole thing tied up. And she pulled and pulled to see if it would hold her. And then she threw the 2 sheets out the window, and it didn't get to the bottom quite. So she pulled them back up and tied a few more sheets on it. That time, it touched the ground. And she climbed all the way down those sheets at 85 over. She wasn't 90 yet. I knew that, but it was between 85 and 90. And she said, she met some friends on the way home that were also going home. And she was swearing up and down, saying, those two damn Germans, they want to keep me for a hostage. That's what they want to do. I'm not a German hostage. And she pounded. And their friend said, "What is the matter with you?" She said, "These Germans locked me up. I'm 85. What good am I to them except as a hostage? I could kill them all." She went down the village street yelling at everything, and they said, "You calm down. We'll walk you home, and we will stay with you tonight." Again, that story came out, and people were laughing at town. "Boy, she's got a good spirit." And that is what helped keep people going, attitudes like that. So this actually was very, very good for people to find other people defending themselves and talking about not giving in. And it was good for people to be able to laugh. It always was wonderful. So then there was a problem. The Germans said, all the windows have to be closed. They have to be tightly curtains. You not have a little sprinkle of light coming out because the SS is coming to visit you. Because every night, there were airplanes going through and bombing all over the place. At that point, in a year after 1941, they started coming in layers. Bombers were flying low over our houses, and at the same time, bombers that were empty came flying the other direction. And it went on day and night and day and night. We never were away from sound. It was really disturbing. That's why I am now deaf. So they had lights, streams of lights that would cross. And if they had them all in one spot, then and an airplane got in that spot, they couldn't shoot down. There was a system that they used to shoot down airplanes. But they didn't want the airplanes to see any lights, so they overdid it. But my brother heard about that, and he said, "Mia and Mom can't do that with all that other stuff." And so from his farm, he came home, measured all the windows, and made frames for all the windows with cardboard in the middle, and with a lock above every window. So we didn't have trouble. But if you haven't got lights, you can't have lights inside. It's a problem to get up to your bedroom. You can't see anything. And my mother had a few candles, but we also had a little pot with a cotton thread going through a cork and a little bit of oil that we had, and we had that to get up the stairs and where we were going. It was a problem. That was really interesting. We also had orders to hand in all our radios because they didn't want us to know anything that was new. And we got all these lies over the radios from the Germans. And So my parents had a very old radio that went, and that's all it did. So they handed that in. And we had a brand new, beautiful radio that would get sendings from all over Europe. But we got the news from the resistance. Because the leaders of the resistors always had a radio, and they could just keep that going for about 5 minutes because the Germans went around with cars and trucks where they could trace where you were. And they only had bicycles, so they could trace them where you were. So just when they heard you, and that was about 5 minutes usually. They had to look at a large area. You wouldn't want to take the chance of them catching you. So, but they kept in contact with England, and the only queen, only royal, according to Churchill. Churchill said this is the only royal male that is working with their country how to defeat the Germans. We admire him greatly, and it was our queen, Wilhelmina, he was talking about. They were constantly in contact with her. What do we need to do here to help? And what is going on in the Netherlands, so that they kept each other happy. So it was getting to the point where we ate stuff that we shouldn't have been eating. There was, for instance, my mother who was canning eggs, kind of. She had a big gray pot out of very heavy stone, and she put all kinds of stuff in it. She had a recipe, and she put all that in, and it was white, and that's about all I know about it. But if she got a dozen eggs, she put them very carefully. She could keep them for 9 months fresh. It was amazing. And if we were really in trouble, she'd fish in there and get some eggs for us, so we could have that. There were people that gave us stuff that they didn't want. The farmers, when they were slaughtering, they didn't want the after delivery of a cattle. You know, a calf was not just born, and there's a milk that is coming out that is much richer than regular milk. They didn't like it because they had some blood in it. They'd give it to us. I was set to stir the stuff really hard, and then you couldn't see the blood, you couldn't taste it, but it was a really good filling meal. We were given a cheese, a whole cheese, but it had cheese mites in it. We ate the cheese with all the mites in it. The farmers gave us brains, kidneys, lungs, hearts, stomachs, etc. We didn't eat some of it either, but most of it we could, like the brains and the kidneys and the heart. They can be cooked very well if they're cleaned well. We didn't get salt. They wouldn't give us salt. Although the 1.5 hour ride, there was a swimming pool that was on the heather. They called it a sea on the heather. Underneath was a deposit of salt from millions ago when that was a dense sea, and it deposited all its salt when it disappeared. The water was disappeared. And we got all our salt from that, but we only got a smidgen in a little bag every month. And we were so hungry for salt that we just open it up and lick it. And then we'd open it even further and lick the paper. And one time we didn't get the salt, so we went swimming in the salt pool. And it was a sea, so they had these boards that made the waves. And we had brought a bottle along so that we could fill it with salt cider, and we'd drink it. Bread made of flour bulbs, that was horrible stuff. And at one point, there was going to be a truck loaded with cabbages. We were so excited to get a whole cabbage, maybe. So we stood in line from 8 o'clock in the evening, and the Germans didn't dare send us home at that point. And the next morning at 10, the truck arrived, and I didn't get a cabbage because the person in front of me got the last one. So I had to go home for nothing. They also were punishing because they didn't like the farmers. And so we got a bunch of Russians dumped on us. They were from the mountains, and they were not Russian. They were mountain people, and they had small horses. Each one had a horse. They were told that they could do whatever they wanted to us, but they didn't have any weapons because the Germans didn't trust them either. And friends of ours had an organ, and there were some of them that came to her every night to play with the organ. They'd never seen a thing like that. They were picking out songs with their fingers, and they didn't do any harm. They were just having a good time, and that was okay. But a bunch of them would go to the farmhouses and break in, throw the men out, and rape the women. And that was not appreciated. So the farmers came together, and we had these lights. You could get lights out of it when you squeezed, because you couldn't get batteries either. They had those, and they got together and they said, when they come, we'll all walk around our house all night after dark. And when we see a light, when they come to your house, then we'll come and help you. And everyone had these lights with them. So if there were 2 farms, the others would come and help and beat these guys, and they killed some of them because they came with a scythe and with pitchforks and great big shovels and whatever else tool they had, and they beat up those guys. And if they tried to rape the women, they killed them. They had it coming. They didn't want to stay any longer. This was a horrible town, you know. They were killing us. We were supposed to be the boss there, but it didn't work. And so the Germans took them away again after they had been there for about 2 weeks, because otherwise they all would have been killed. It was that kind of a town. It had a bad reputation, but we defended each other. So this is close to the end. It was very hard on my mother. And I tried to help her. My brother did what he could, and he put all these frames in. But every night we stood outside where the Germans couldn't see us, behind the houses, where they wouldn't go. And we looked at Germany burning. The whole horizon was bright, brilliant red from all the fires. We watched the first time that they came, they went across our border, and near where we were, the border in Germany, there was a big factory. It had a huge chimney on it, and a very tall chimney, and it had day and night clouds coming out of it, clouds of smoke. One of them hit the factory perfectly. He dropped the bomb, and it hit that chimney, got into the chimney halfway, and the whole thing exploded. And it all came down on the factory side, and it destroyed it completely. And another one, I still don't understand how he ever could have known that. He dropped a bomb that looked like it was just land. And we saw it falling, and then suddenly, whoosh, it burned. And it burned for weeks. It was a gas, or however you call that. And the Germans didn't know how to put those out. And so it just burned, and it was so loud, we couldn't talk to ourselves, not even several miles away. And it was awful. And so we saw the first bombing, and then every day after, they came over different places, but every night it's the east heavens were totally on fire. And it was 10 years after we were married that we were in Europe. We went to see some things in Europe, and everything was rubble. And they hadn't been able to do half the work yet to clean all of it up. It's just big piles of pieces of houses. And I don't understand where they put all those people, but then the Russians came from the other side, but they did some damage too. I think this is about all I have for you today. And this is, from my point of view, talk about how war changes women and how women took it. They were wonderful. We cried, we laughed, we could play tricks on it. We had one trick that was really funny. The Germans never understood. We had a passport kind of thing, and inside it said, you had to show what was in it to the people. And they could tell you, you had to show this, or you have to take it and you have to hand it over, or we want more information and stuff like that. They called that a PB. And PB in Dutch is a shortage for puppeter bloot. That means bear behind. And so they'd hand you this thing and say, hand us this, and people start bursting out laughing. It was really funny. Another one was an artist had drawn 4 pigs on a sheet and then folded it a certain way. And if you folded it a certain way, you got a portrait of Hitler. And people were laughing about that too. They were carrying it, but it was very dangerous because the Germans were furious about it. And so, constantly were funny things happening. Does anybody have any questions?
Could you point out where you lived on the map?
Oh,
On the red Lawson?
thank you, Marika. You know where it is. Exactly. It's right on the border. Yeah, that's Losser.
Looking over.
Yeah.
Thank you.
When I visited, Uncle Willem took me over to get gas in Germany.
Yeah. And everything was going by the time the tires on the bicycle broke and were too old, they made it out of willow wood. The branches are very flexible and you could wind them around it, but that doesn't work very well, I learned. So the western part is all having trouble with water all the time. If they're not anymore because they have reinforced that whole area against the North Sea. But when I was growing up still, when there was a really bad storm, the church bells would ring, particularly the great big ones, and go dung, dung, dung. All the churches let dang on the bells. And that meant that every male had to go to their station to reinforce the dikes. And one of those things that is in the Netherlands, they learned to work together because everybody had to be there to protect your families so they wouldn't drown and so that the dikes would be strong all the time. And I was once there when there was a big storm and it went that way. It was impressive. And my uncles took off on their bikes to their dike area where they had with shovels and they always had stuff available to build them up. So it was really great. Since then, they have done a tremendous job at stopping all this. The rivers are high above the land, and many of the houses are lower than the rivers. They have brought from France and Germany so much silt that it couldn't handle it and went down in the rivers, and every time it got overflowing, they built up the sides of the rivers. And so the rivers are up here and the houses are down here somewhere. It's a very interesting country. But when you have a really big storm and it starts flooding, people drown. And so one in Leiden is a university where all the people that really know how to deal with water get their training. Just before the war, they started building a dike across. Let me show you where that is. Oh. When they started building, um, they had to close this. And that was the most difficult part because you have ebb and flood, and you have to lower a ship or something.
The microphone.
Well designed and filled with stuff so that it won't ever float up again. At exactly the point where the ebb changes to flood. It had to be still. It had to be still totally. Otherwise it would be shoved in the wrong place. And they had a terrible time with doing that. And they figured out how to finally, but it took a year about to figure out how to get that done. And then they built right here was the first island, the first land that they made, and it was attached to the old land. And they found out it was not worth anything because the sea underneath brought salt on the land that was already here. So that land was spoiled. So they had to go making islands in here. And it turned out there was a wide spot all along there that was sand, they found out. And then in the center, it was still heavy clay where you could grow things. And so now they have an area where you can go sailing and swimming and doing all kinds of water sports, as well as a land where you can grow all kinds of things. Now they have everywhere over all these islands, and down here, right down here, this is all stopped here. These are all islands, and they would flood terribly when there was a bad storm. But now they're all covered with machinery that can push the water back out again in a bad storm. So it has been experimental, and now they feel that they have just about get it all under control. Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for telling us about your mother. What a remarkable woman. I'm wondering how you kept anger and hatred from ruining your life after this.
What did she say?
She says she wonders how you kept anger and hatred from ruining your life.
Well, the thing was, it wasn't all Germans. There were a lot of Germans that didn't go along with Hitler at all. And it was persons that were all, I would have locked them all up, and the people that were in charge of what they were doing with the Jewish people and the gypsies and the Poles and everybody else, you can't just make everybody guilty, because there are a lot of people that don't feel that way. And there were a lot. I'll give you one example. My friend and I one time were playing outside, and it was in the woods, and we heard somebody crying, and we went to look, and he was a teenager, about 17, 18, sitting there crying his eyes out. And we asked him, it was a German in uniform, and he said, I all my life wanted to be an electrical engineer, and I was just admitted to the best university in Germany. And I was so looking forward to doing research and making things and learning as much as I could. And now I'm supposed to go to Russia. And he said, I don't want to go to Russia. I hate them. He was a German. So can I judge him? No, I can't. I felt terribly sorry for him. And we wished him well. We had to. And we tried to console him and talk with him. I didn't feel, I was accused of talking to the enemy after the war. But I don't feel that was right, because there was one time when I was stopped, when I had something with me that I wasn't supposed to have, and they had orders to just shoot me if I had it. And the sergeant said, stop. I had dropped it from my bicycle. And I've had it, you know. They were all had weapons. And I'm not going to be able to get home this time. And this sergeant came up to me and he said, Fräulein, young lady, this means, you have lost something. Let me get it for you and I'll tie it on the back. And he said, I hate them too. And he said, will you please go as fast as you can so you don't run into another patrol? Now, am I supposed to get mad at him? There were a lot of people in Germany, but everybody was so afraid of the leaders because they felt no qualm to just shoot somebody or beating somebody or sending somebody to these horrible camps, you know, where they murdered everybody and tortured people. That was not the real Germany. And I hope they never come back.
I want to add a little bit. My Dutch cousins, they didn't have that experience. And when I was visiting in the late 80s or early 90s, they really just hated the Germans, right? And I was like, ever since then, I was like, my mom has made that distinction, that they're all people. And the other comment I would like to make is that a decade or two ago, there was a play at La Jolla Playhouse called A Trip to Bergen-Belsen, or A Trip to Bergen. And it was a monologue by a Jewish lady who had lost her parents at a concentration camp, and she traveled to Bergen-Belsen with her grandfather. And the line from that play that struck me was, he told her, thank God I'm a Jew, because I don't have to make the distinction between being persecuted and persecuting. I don't have to make that choice.
Thank you, Marika. My parents both were very strong, saying individuals have to be judged by whom they are, not who everybody else behaves. And so that's where I come from, too. Any other questions? Then we'll call it to an end. There will be one more for sure, and that is the last 9 months that we had trouble with the Germans, and it was the worst one. But also, at that point, at the end of that, we were liberated, and I'll tell you about that too. you.
As an agent.